In the silence of a late African night, a single phone call changed everything. Not from Washington, not from Paris, not even from London, but from Beijing. 47 minutes of words delivered in flawless English, wrapped in fear, revealed a truth that had been hidden for decades. For 20 years, China has built roads, railways, ports, and power stations across our continent. They presented themselves as partners, different from the colonial powers of old. But what if the truth is far darker? What if this is not partnership, but a new form of control? What if the same hands that claim to build are also the hands that tighten the chains of dependency? Yet this story is not only about pressure from outside. It is also about the rising strength of a people once scattered, now remembering their unity. Across oceans, across centuries, a movement is unfolding. Africans and African Americans standing together in ways that terrify global powers. Stay with us. This isn't just a headline, it's our living history. Subscribe and stand together for an Africa that refuses to be colonized again. And so the question remains, will this be the moment Africa claims its true independence or another chapter of promises broken? 3 weeks ago, a call pierced the stillness of the night. It came not from the White House, nor from the Elysee Palace, nor from Downing Street. It came from Beijing. On the line was a voice speaking flawless English, but beneath the precision of the words was a tremor, a tone of fear that no language can conceal. For exactly 47 minutes, I listened as a Chinese official sought to persuade, to warn, and to threaten all at once. The subject of that call was not only Burkina Faso, not only Africa, but a new bond between Africans on the continent and Africans in America. The voice told me plainly, these partnerships between African nations and African Americans are causing concern among those who have invested heavily in what they call Africa's future. In truth, what they mean is their control of Africa's future. It was in that moment that I understood. For 2 decades, while America turned its back and Europe clung to its old colonial grasp, China had stepped quietly into the vacuum. They built roads stretching across deserts, railways piercing jungles, ports along every coast, and factories rising in our capitals. They lent us billions wrapped in words of friendship and promises of partnership, and for a while, many believed them. We wanted to believe that Beijing was not Paris, not London, not Washington. We wanted to believe that at last a power had come not to exploit but to support. But then came the conditions. Every loan demanded that Chinese companies win the contracts. Every project required Chinese workers to fill the jobs. Every plan was tied to Chinese technology. And when repayments faltered, as they inevitably did, Beijing seized the infrastructure itself. What they named the Belt and Road Initiative, I have come to call the Debt and Control Initiative. Let us speak plainly. This was not charity. It was not partnership. It was a calculated strategy designed not to free Africa, but to keep Africa tethered, to bind our future to theirs as securely as any chain of iron. The call I received was not a call of friendship. It was the sound of fear, fear that their grip was slipping. Fear that Africans, once scattered, had begun to remember who we are. The fear was not about roads or railways. It was about something far greater. For Beijing never imagined that over 50 million African Americans, with $1.6 trillion in annual purchasing power, might one day look back across the Atlantic and say, "We are coming home." They never considered that centuries of innovation, creativity, and resilience could return to Africa not as charity, but as power. And so a struggle has begun. Not of armies on battlefields, but of ideas, of resources, of futures being written in real time. The question is no longer whether Africa will rise, it is how and with whom. But what happened next shattered Beijing's confidence and revealed a weakness they had long tried to hide. 5 years before that midnight call, I attended a security conference in Ghana. It was during an unremarkable coffee break that I stumbled upon words which would change my view of global power forever. 2 Chinese officials were speaking in Mandarin, assuming no one else nearby could understand. But I had studied enough of the language during my military training to follow their conversation. One complained about African governments demanding technology transfer and local hiring in exchange for contracts. The other dismissed the concern with chilling arrogance. Do not worry. Africans are excellent consumers, but terrible innovators. They will always need us to build, to design, to manage. The key is to keep them dependent. Those words burned into me. They revealed not partnership, but contempt, not respect, but calculation. In that moment, I understood what China's gleaming railways and power plants truly represented. Not gifts, but chains of a new kind. Yet arrogance often blinds the powerful. China believed dependency was inevitable. They believed Africans lacked the imagination and the unity to prove them wrong. They had not counted on Marcus Johnson. Marcus was a young African-American software engineer who carried both the skills of Silicon Valley and the pride of his ancestors. 6 months before Beijing's midnight call, Marcus formed partnerships with African technology firms in Nigeria, Ghana, and my own Burkina Faso. Together, they pursued the lucrative West African telecommunications contract. For 3 years, Chinese state enterprises had prepared to seize that contract, pouring millions into lobbying, feasibility studies, and political persuasion. They were certain it was theirs. But when the decision came, the world witnessed the impossible. China lost. The contract went not to Beijing, not to Paris, not to Washington, but to Africans, working side by side with African Americans. Marcus and his partners had designed a network more secure, more affordable, and more adaptable than the Chinese alternative. Most importantly, they trained African engineers to manage and upgrade the system themselves, cutting the cords of dependency Beijing had so carefully tied. The reaction in China was one of disbelief. For 2 decades, their dominance in African infrastructure had gone unchallenged. To lose to Africans themselves was unthinkable. In Beijing's halls of power, alarm bells rang louder than ever before. Suddenly, Africa was not just a market. Africa had become a competitor. That is when my invitation arrived. 2 months after Marcus's victory, the Chinese government offered to host me for what they called informal consultations. They promised first-class flights, luxury accommodations, and access to their highest-ranking officials. I accepted, not for the comforts, but for the chance to hear their fears with my own ears. In Beijing, I encountered no lectures about democracy, no sermons on human rights. Instead, they came straight to business. President Traoré, the foreign minister began, China has invested over $200 billion in African development. We have built roads, railways, and power plants. We have provided loans when Western banks would not. We have created jobs where Western companies refused to invest. Then came the words that revealed their true anxiety. But now we hear that you are encouraging African Americans to invest in Africa. We fear that inexperienced diaspora involvement may disrupt carefully planned strategies. I asked them, what do you mean by inexperienced? Their answer was meant to dismiss, but it exposed their terror. African Americans may succeed in America, but they do not understand Africa. They do not have the scale, the expertise, or the resources to manage continental projects. In that moment, I realized the truth. They were not afraid of inexperience. They were afraid of expertise. Expertise rooted in both the world's most advanced economy and the deepest bonds of history. From that day forward, Beijing's mask began to slip. Their fear had a face, and it looked like the reunion of a scattered people. But what happened during my second day in Beijing would reveal fears deeper than anything I had imagined. On the second day of my visit to Beijing, the truth revealed itself with even sharper clarity. I sat in a grand meeting hall across from representatives of China's most powerful corporations, mining firms, construction giants, telecommunications providers, and financial institutions. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. It lasted 6. Each executive from different industries told me the same story. They were alarmed. Alarmed not by Europe, not by America, but by African Americans working hand in hand with African nations. A mining official confessed, "Your diaspora engineers are training locals to operate machinery we thought only Chinese technicians could manage. They are making our expertise less necessary." A telecommunications executive complained, "African American experts are helping Africans design software that rivals our own products. They are creating competition where we thought none could exist." A banker admitted with unease, The diaspora understands both American markets and African needs. They are creating financial products more effective than ours. They are making Chinese finance irrelevant. By the end of that meeting, their fear was undeniable. For 20 years, China had positioned itself as the only alternative to Western dominance. They believed Africa had no other choice. But the rise of partnerships between Africans and African Americans shattered that illusion. For the first time, China faced not dependency but resistance. When I returned home, Beijing acted swiftly. Within weeks, African nations with strong diaspora partnerships began to suffer sudden disruptions. Projects funded by Chinese banks were mysteriously delayed. Loans already approved were sent back for review. Joint ventures collapsed overnight when Chinese companies abruptly withdrew. Trade agreements once hailed as generous became tighter, more expensive, more restrictive. The message was unmistakable: choose Chinese dependency or choose diaspora partnership, but not both. For many African leaders, this was a turning point. Some hesitated, fearing the economic costs of defying Beijing, but others recognized something greater was at stake. The question was no longer only about contracts and infrastructure. It was about dignity, sovereignty, and the right to shape our own future. And it was in this moment that the diaspora stepped forward with new determination. African Americans who once viewed Africa as a distant ancestral homeland began to see it as a living, urgent calling. Investors who had hesitated now realized they were part of a global struggle for Africa's destiny. Dr. Kesha Williams, a renewable energy scientist from Atlanta, captured it best. She told me, "At first I thought I was only installing solar panels. Now I understand I am part of a movement to free Africa from dependency on any foreign power." Her words echoed across countless fields. In health, Dr. Michael Thompson helped design medical training systems so that Africa could heal its people without foreign dependence. In technology, Marcus Johnson and his colleagues proved that African and diaspora expertise could build systems stronger than those imposed from abroad. From these efforts emerged something new: the African Diaspora Development Network. Within 3 months, professionals from 23 African nations and hundreds of diaspora experts were linked into one movement. Resources, strategies, and knowledge flowed across borders, transforming scattered efforts into a united force. For the first time in modern history, Africans on the continent and in the diaspora were not separated by oceans, but united by purpose. It was no longer about projects, it was about liberation. The consequences were profound. Economically, African nations began to explore genuine alternatives to dependency. Politically, leaders discovered courage in numbers. Culturally, communities felt a renewed pride that the world could not ignore. Yet Beijing's pressure did not stop, and with every attempt to intimidate, the alliance only grew stronger. If you believe this marks the beginning of true anti-colonial Africa, let your voice be heard in the comments below. Because history is being written and silence has never built freedom. But the world beyond Africa was also watching, and their reactions would shape the battles yet to come. As the African Diaspora Alliance gathered strength, the ripple effects spread far beyond our continent. For Beijing, it was a direct challenge to a 20-year strategy built on the quiet accumulation of influence. For the rest of the world, it was a wake-up call. In Washington, officials who had long ignored Africa began to take notice. For decades, American foreign policy treated Africa as an afterthought, something to be addressed through aid packages or humanitarian missions, never as an equal partner. Yet now it was not the United States government leading the way, but African Americans themselves. Their investments, skills, and networks were flowing into Africa with a vision more ambitious than any policy paper from Capitol Hill. In Europe, the reaction was more complicated. The European Union, already uneasy about China's Belt and Road dominance, saw the diaspora movement as both a threat and an opportunity. On one hand, it weakened Beijing's monopoly. On the other, it threatened Europe's lingering economic leverage. For centuries, Europe justified its presence in Africa with promises of development and modernization. But with Africans and African Americans building alternatives, Europe's old arguments rang hollow. Russia, ever eager to undermine Western and Chinese influence alike, sought entry points into the new reality. Moscow positioned itself as a sympathetic partner, offering weapons, energy deals, and diplomatic backing. Yet even Russia understood that what was forming was not simply another geopolitical alignment. It was something deeper. Africans rediscovering their own capacity to lead. Regional bodies like ECOWAS and the African Union faced a choice. Would they remain cautious, hedging between powers, or would they embrace the possibility of true self-determination? For the first time in decades, their decisions carried global weight. And Beijing? Beijing moved from alarm to desperation. They poured more money into Africa, offering softer loan terms and bigger promises of technology transfer. They tried to divide nations by offering special deals to those who resisted diaspora partnerships. They even attempted to lure African-American entrepreneurs eastward with the promise of lucrative ventures in Asia. But none of it could replicate the authenticity of family, because that was the heart of the matter. Africans and African-Americans were not connected by contracts or strategy alone. They were connected by blood, by memory, by a sense of history that neither China nor Europe nor America could manufacture. That authenticity made every partnership not just economic, but deeply personal. And so the question facing the world was clear. Would Africa remain the stage for foreign strategies, or would it become the author of its own story? But even as global powers adjusted, the most decisive choices were still to be made, not in Washington or Beijing, but within Africa itself. Africa now stands at a crossroads more profound than any since independence. The continent has weathered centuries of colonization, decades of exploitation, and years of promises broken. Yet today, for the first time in living memory, a genuine alternative is visible on the horizon. One path is familiar. It is the road of dependency, paved with Chinese loans and foreign contracts. On this path, Africa may continue to build roads and ports, but they will carry the weight of debts that compromise sovereignty. Power stations may rise, but they will hum to the rhythm of Beijing's demands. On this path, Africa builds but never owns. The other path is more daring, more uncertain, yet infinitely more powerful. It is the path of African unity, fueled by the return of diaspora expertise and capital. It is a model of growth where African universities become world-class not because foreign lecturers arrive, but because African Americans bring knowledge home. It is a future where factories hum not with imported labor, but with African workers trained by their brothers and sisters across the ocean. It is a vision of prosperity not dependent on favors, but born of self-determination. Already, glimpses of this future are emerging. Renewable energy networks designed by diaspora scientists are lighting villages long ignored by global corporations. Financial systems crafted by African-American bankers are offering credit and opportunity where Chinese institutions saw only profit margins. Medical training programs led by diaspora doctors are preparing a generation of African surgeons and nurses to heal their own communities. But the choice is not automatic. It requires courage, coordination, and above all, unity. China will not yield its influence willingly. Europe will not easily release its grip. America will not simply watch without interest. Each will attempt to shape Africa's direction to serve their own needs. The true question is whether Africans will allow it, or whether we will seize the chance to lead ourselves. This is not merely about economics. It is about dignity. It is about whether future generations inherit a continent still negotiating its freedom, or a continent that has finally claimed it. And so the choice lies before us all. Will Africa take the easier road of dependency or the harder but holier road of liberation? The answer to that question will shape the next chapter of our history, and it leads us directly to the final message. We have traveled through whispers overheard in foreign halls, through contracts won against impossible odds, through meetings where fear was hidden behind smiles. We have seen how Beijing's 20-year strategy, backed by more than $200 billion, sought to entangle Africa in chains of debt and dependency. And we have witnessed how those chains began to snap, not through charity, not through pity, but through the reunion of a people once divided. This is the meaning of our age, a second liberation. The first tore down colonial flags. The second must tear down colonial economics. This is the dawn of anti-colonial Africa, not written in manifestos alone, but in fiber optic cables, solar grids, medical schools, and the hands of Africans and African Americans working as one. Think of what has already been achieved. A telecommunications network designed and owned by Africans. Renewable energy projects freeing villages from foreign fuel. Financial products built by those who understand both African communities and global markets. These are not dreams. They are living proof that dependence is not destiny. And yet the struggle is far from over. China, Europe, America, all will continue to fight for influence. They will attempt to divide us, to distract us, to diminish us. But the lesson of these years is clear. Unity terrifies them more than weapons, more than wealth, more than any treaty. Unity makes their strategies obsolete. The question now is not whether Africa can rise. The question is whether we will choose to rise together. Will we embrace the full power of our diaspora bond, or will we falter under the weight of old habits? Will we settle for being the market of others, or will we dare to be the makers of our own destiny? To all who hear this, if this story awakens something in your chest, do not let it fade. Like, share, and subscribe, not as routine actions, but as declarations. Our ancestors gave their blood for freedom. We must give our unity for true African development. Type it in the comments, New Africa. Africa rise. It's time for Africa. Let the world see that the call for liberation is not silent, not hidden, but shouted from every corner of the diaspora. Because this is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, one where anti-colonial Africa is not a dream deferred, but a destiny fulfilled, and where the promise of African development is not a slogan, but a lived reality.